So this is Comm 202 small groups, quick tip number 3. And part of what we're looking at this week, this is week 2, is roles in group. And I think I said in my previous video that I start out with a picture. Here is roles in a group, right? Not what we're talking about, but I have my weird sense of humor, as you've started to realize. But I did want to talk about a little bit quickly in a quick tip about roles and groups. We won't obviously in this go anywhere near covering all the material in this. I mean, look how big this thing is. We're going to cover a couple of slides and that's it. So all groups have certain required roles that are necessary. You just, by definition, you have to have certain roles met. And what exactly is a role? Well, a role is the expected behavior that's associated with the parts that we play in groups. So as we'll learn, there are certain roles that have to be components of groups. So every group, for example, is going to have a leader. Most good, successful groups pick their own leader, but there has to be somebody to sort of direct traffic. There's usually somebody who fills the role as the mediator. And there's somebody who sort of fills the policing role, and somebody who fills the role of being the one that goes and researches stuff. And you'll have a material expert usually or two. And there's all these different roles that we are expected to play in a particular group. And really successful groups get all of those roles filled out. And that's just a basic component of any type of group. Again, and I've mentioned this before, think of it in terms of a sports team or a band, a band of musicians. Band of musicians, for example, most of the time you've got to have a drummer, you've got to have a bass player, a guitar player, a keyboard player, a vocalist. I mean, that's sort of the basics, right? Or a sports team, let's go to football, American football. You've got to have a quarterback, running backs, a center, linemen, receivers, and we all know what role we are playing within a group. Hopefully, like this week, you're putting your groups together. Hopefully by the end of the week, you'll kind of have a feel for who's doing what roles within the group. It's just a basic component. It's how things get done. Now, what we're going to find out is there's the functional role, which is getting whatever the task at hand is. So in this case, it's getting your team project done for a grade. But then there's also the social dynamic or the social role, and we have all kinds of roles there too. You have the person who has the sympathetic ear and listens to people. You have the person who calms people down when things start to get heated. You have, various roles from a social aspect that come into play. Both of those sets of roles are equally important in a group. I think I pulled this out of the book, or it might have been the previous version of the book. But if you think of a beehive, the bees all have their roles and they all function within their roles. So the queen has one role: lay eggs, make more bees. That's it, right? And the worker bees are the ones that take care of the larvae, and they take care of the hive, and they keep the hive clean, and they pretty much stay within the hive all the time. And then you've got the males. The males do all of the leaving the hive, going out and finding pollen, coming back with food to feed the nest and to keep the queen bee alive. And you can tell they all look different, but when they're first born in babies, baby bees or whatever, honeybees and babies, they all have their certain roles that they fill, and they know what their role is. And so they get their roles done. What happens with people, we don't always know what our roles are, or we feel like maybe we should interject ourselves into someone else's role, and that starts playing with that group climate, that group dynamic. Roles, and this is a fact of life, are not of equal value. Football team's a perfect example, even a musician band. In a musician's band, a band of musicians, you have typically a lead singer, maybe a lead guitar player, a drummer, a bass player. Almost think of all the bands you almost always know the lead singer, you almost always know who the guitar players are. Most people cannot name the drummer, and even less people can name the bass player. That's just the way life is. The roles are all incredibly important. If you've ever heard a band play without a bass player, the music does not work. It does not flow. It does not groove because the bass role is not there. But a really good bassist, and this is what my role is in the band I'm in now, a really good bassist isn't actually noticed in the music when they're playing, but it's noticed when they're not there. And so they don't get the same value, the same attention, the same spotlight as the lead singer does or as the lead guitar player does. There's a really funny Chris Rock clip that I show when I'm teaching Comm 102. There I am mentioning Comm 102 again. And it has to do with more about how couples work, because we talk about couples and communication and close relationships, which groups are close relationships as well. And in this clip, Chris Rock talks about when you are in a relationship, and you could easily change it to when you're in a group, you have different roles. And he uses the musician thing as well. Sometimes you sing lead and sometimes you play tambourine. And nobody wants to see a mad tambourine player. And it perfectly demonstrates that the roles are not equally valued by general public or people outside of the group, because there's always going to be somebody who's the leader. Quarterbacks in American football get all the glory and they get all the money. But if you didn't have those linemen up there protecting that quarterback could do squat, right? But the linemen never get the attention. They don't get the spotlight. They rarely ever get nearly the money that the quarterback does, but they protect it. So roles are not equally valued. Higher status roles in some teams can cause negative climates. If all the rest of the team feels like one person is getting all of the attention and they're not getting their equal due, they're going to feel left out, taken for granted. They're going to feel devalued. And a lot of times that's going to cause ripples. We just talked about ripples. And it could even cause a group to fall apart. And we see this in music groups all the time. And I've seen it happen in sports teams all the time too. One big fancy star comes in to play for a team and they're very me oriented. And in groups, as we'll find out, groups are very society and we oriented, that they have to in order to survive. And you put a me mentality in there, and then it starts causing a negative climate. And the me mentality usually is the spotlight role, like the lead singer or the quarterback or something like that. And it can cause all kinds of problems. So teams have to pay attention, groups have to pay attention to all of their roles and make sure that everyone feels valued. That's why one of those social rules is the harmonizer, who makes sure that if they're paying attention to the pulse of the group from a social aspect, and they're paying attention to when people are starting to feel left out or they feel like they're not being appreciated. And the harmonizer's social role is to sort of help that person overcome that. Another part of being in roles and teams is that sometimes people who have the higher status role can abuse the power of that role and start dictating to everybody else when they're actually they might get the spotlight, but they're still an equal cog to the group, just like everybody else is. And when they start to let that spotlight get to their head, then they start becoming a problem. And again, ripples happen. I'm not going to show this clip, but the Stanford Prison Experiment is an excellent example of we will move into the roles that we're expected to play a lot of times. Hopefully it lines up with our skill set, but sometimes it doesn't. And it can cause all kinds of issues. You might want to look this up on YouTube about the Stanford Prison Experiment. There's a whole lot of controversy about it and how it was conducted and everything. But the general idea is, and I've seen this happen so many times in work situations, we will assume the roles we're expected to play because that's where we feel like were supposed to be to make the group function well in our idea of that. If people have multiple roles, if the group is too small, there's not enough people to fill all the roles, and so people have to take on multiple roles. Sometimes that can cause a conflict in them because they're torn between the two roles and which one do they do and which one do they fill out. And when that happens, it will sometimes cause people to want to leave the group and get out because of the stress of, oh my God, I'm balancing these two roles. And I'm not talking about all group members are going to have a functional role and a social role. That's pretty normal. But let's say they have two functional roles, like I'm the researcher and I'm the group leader at the same time. Well, that's going to be an awful lot of stress. And when that happens, I'm typically going to choose the role that has the higher importance or the higher impact, which in that case would be group leader, and I'll let the research fall. And then that overall hurts the group. So you want to make sure that you have all of your roles that you need defined, and then you have people to fill all of those particular roles, and you're paying attention so that nobody feels like they're getting overloaded or overweight with stuff, and then they want to leave the group, because that's always a detriment to the group. Another thing that's really helpful is role reversal, going and walking a mile in another role's shoes. You really appreciate a role better when you have been in that particular role. And I'll use a personal example. So I've mentioned multiple times I'm a musician and I play bass in a band right now. I play guitar, I play bass, I play dobro, I play mandolin. I have dabbled with drums, but I'm horrible. Because I have played almost every instrument in the band, and I've been the front man, so I've been the lead singer, I've also been the backing singer, and I've been in bands where they didn't want me to sing at all. I've fulfilled all of those different roles. So in a way, I've been through role reversal because I understand what it's like to be the bass player, or I understand what it's like to be the lead guitar player or the front man. And it makes me appreciate those roles. In fact, one of the reasons I play bass now is once I had to fill that role because we didn't have anybody to do the bass and it fell on me to do it. I found out that I really liked it, and I found out how important that role is. And before that, I never really gave bass player much consideration. I was like everybody else, I don't know who the bass players are. It's not really that important. It's four strings. How hard can it be? Blah, 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 blah. And then when we didn't have one, it was like, hey, this music is really hurting. We need a bass player. And I played in a band one time where the drummer had a little too much to drink. And we were on the last song, and it was a Southern rock band, and we were playing, such a cliche, but we were playing Give Me Three Steps from Leonard Skinner. And the drummer passed out in the middle of the song, and all of a sudden we lost the drums. And everybody else was hitting it, but the drums completely washing out and going away killed that entire song. And you're like, oh my God, that's such an important thing. We've got to have, all of the functions there doing really well. Role reversal helps you learn and appreciate all of the different roles that are in groups. And I have been in groups where everybody rotated around and took turns doing each one of the roles, trying to figure out, okay, where do we best fit it? Real early on, sometimes groups will do that to try to figure out what's good. That TV show Undercover Boss is an excellent example of this kind of thing, because a lot of those company CEOs and owners will disguise themselves and go in and work at a very low level role in a business because they want to see what is it like on these low level roles and how is it compared to how they think it is. And if you watch one or two of those episodes, you see most of the time the owner's like, I had no idea it was like this, and you learn to appreciate the roles that other people play, and you realize just how important those roles are, even though they might not get the glory, they might not get the money, and they might, none of that happens. Another example of that happened during the pandemic. We suddenly realized how important nurses were, and doctors too, but particularly nurses, LPNs and RNs, because here we've got this huge medical crisis in the world, and all of a sudden we need nurses and we don't have enough. And you're like, oh, wow, I never realized how important nurses were. So learning about the roles in the group and what all they do is a very important part of understanding group dynamics and building a good, successful group climate. So that's what I wanted to talk about from a role standpoint for this quick tip. If I have time, I'll do another one. And if you got any questions, comments, whatever, shoot me an email or catch me in office hours, and I'll talk to you later.